Welcome back to Everard Junction. Today we're going to be doing some weathering. I haven't quite progressed as far as I would like with the scenery on the town area. I'm working my way around the corner, but owing to recent weather, it's not been all that comfortable up here, so I've not made as much progress as I would have liked. So video on this section to come in future, and for now let's crack on with doing some projects downstairs. And today we're going to be focusing on weathering the Hornby Seacow ballast wagon. I noticed recently that Hornby have done another run of the popular Seacow ballast wagon. Now, I have 4 of these already on the layout, which I had acquired via eBay as I missed out on the original release. So I was pleased to see that they're back in the shops again, so I've picked up another 5 to try and make my ballast train a little bit longer. It was quite a common sight during the time period I'm modelling, 1989, to see a pair of Class 33s working such trains as they worked their way towards the area of the network that required various bits of maintenance, usually overnight. So now I have a more convincing set of 9 or so wagons. I think they're in dire need of some weathering. So while I was waiting for the new wagons to turn up in the post, I set to weathering the 4 Seacows that I already had, and here is one of those in front of you now. Now, I bought these off of eBay. They were in pretty much mint condition, but unfortunately they were already weathered from the factory by Hornby in the typical 2007-2008 style of weathering that the manufacturers did back then, which consisted of spraying something akin to sand over the side of the model. It doesn't look very good. So I rubbed all of that off. It took absolutely ages, used up a lot of cotton buds and a fair bit of IPA, but it certainly looked a lot better with removing that, and then I've gone over it again and weathered it to my own tastes. I'm modelling them during their time with British Railways in the late 80s, when this colour scheme was only about 10 or so years old. So we're going for that used, in-service look that was typical of many of the wagons during this time period. And as you can see, in comparison to the new examples, they certainly look quite a bit better. The new ones are far too clean and shiny. So let's set to getting those weathered. It's a simple technique, it's quite easy to do, and I'll show you how I achieved it. Okay, so here we are on the workbench. We've got all 5 of the new wagons ready to go for some weathering. I'm going to start off by painting the wheels. This can be done on rolling stock with the wheels in situ. You don't need to necessarily take them out. I find it's perfectly easy to do with them in situ, and then we'll move on to doing the various weathering effects. As you can see, I'm wearing some gloves. Advisable to wear gloves. You're working with lots of paints and stuff, so it keeps the paint off of your hands, and of course you don't really want to get greasy fingerprints on the models themselves. I will clean the models before we do the weathering, but after they have been cleaned, if you just work at this with bare hands, it's all too easy to put a fingerprint onto the model, so we will avoid that by wearing gloves.
Okay, so it's been a few hours and the wheels are now dried. You can see it's fairly straightforward, simply spinning the wheel with your thumb and holding the brush still. I used Rail Match Sleeper Grime. It's one of my favourite colours for doing weathering. Sleeper Grime is number 406 for the paint code. So now it's time just to give the body sides a quick clean, ready for weathering effects. Just get rid of any dirt, grease and fingerprints that may be on them, which will show up in the weathering. So for that, just use a piece of cloth and some isopropyl alcohol in a spray bottle. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is apply some highlighting by means of a wash to the wagon, just to highlight some of the detail and get a little bit of ingrained dirt in those hard to reach areas. So you can see the wagon on the top has got a subtle weathering effect compared to the pristine wagon on the bottom. So to do this, I've got some water, and this time I'm actually using some weathering powder. Sometimes I use paint, sometimes I use an actual product, you know, a wash, such as a Humbrol wash, or in this case, I've decided to use some weathering powders for a change. It's nice to experiment with different materials, mix things up. Don't always have to do the same thing. So we've got a wash there with some black weathering powder in, probably a 5% ratio, 5% weathering powder, 95% water, nice thin wash. We've then got a dry paintbrush and then a fine tip paintbrush for applying the wash to the details. Next thing we need as well is just a bit of damp cloth. You'll see the importance of that in a moment. So let's get started and start applying a subtle wash just to give the wagon a little bit of weathering, take the edge off it, provide a good base for the weathering effects we're going to do later on. Okay, so we've got some weathering wash on the paintbrush, and then all we want to do is just go around the top of the wagon and the sides of the main ribs there. Okay, now we've done that, take the dry paintbrush, and because this is a weathering powdered wash, I can rub it and wipe it down the sides of the wagon to create some streaking effects. And there we go. Very, very subtle, but does certainly make a difference. Now we can see on that one, that's a little bit much. So take the damp cloth, wipe it along, and as that water evaporates, you will notice that weathering effect has been subdued. So you can use that technique to remove some of the wash if you think it's a little bit much. In this case, I think I've actually removed too much, especially on this side. So we'll just redo that bit there. Okay, there we go. Obviously it's still drying at the moment, but there's a nice subtle weathered wash effect. So I'll go ahead and do the other 4, and we'll come back and start adding some rust and further weathering effects. Okay, so there we have the wash applied to the wagons. I think you'll agree it certainly just tones things down, makes them look a little bit more realistic, a bit more convincing. You could arguably stop at this point if you wanted to. They've had the edge taken off them. They're not shiny. They look used, but they're not filthy. I'm going to take things a bit further. As I said, these were engineers' wagons. This colour scheme was at least 10 years old at the time of the era that my layout is set in. So some rust and some further effects I think will certainly be needed. Now, something worth mentioning that I do try and do on my rakes of freight rolling stock, and that is variation. Do not weather every single one of these in exactly the same way. It was very rare to see a long rake of wagons and all of them to be in exactly the same condition. So some of these are going to be more heavily rusted than others, and I intend to keep at least 2 of them in an unrusted condition. No rust on at least 2 of them, just dirty. It will make the rake look a little bit more interesting, some being more heavily weathered than others. So now we're going to do some surface rust effects on this particular example. For the rust, I'm actually using sleeper grime again. I deal with rust almost on a daily basis at work, and once rust has been on a piece of metal for a couple of years, the colour goes from that sort of zingy orange colour to really a very, very dark brown, and in some cases it can almost look like a grey or a black. Looking at pictures of these wagons in service, again, that seems to be the case. As the rust gets a bit of age to it, that fresh zingy orange that you might see, for example, is some weathering powders. That's representing sort of fresh, recent rust that has only just started to form. Once rust is a few years old, you'll find it's a much darker colour. So I shall be using this colour to represent the rusted effects on these wagons, and to do that I've got a piece of sponge, just a little offcut of sponge from some spare packaging, and we're going to be using it in a stippling fashion along the wagon to create those little bubbles and blisters of rust on the paintwork. Okay, so just dab the piece of sponge in the paint, take off some of the excess. You can see the effect there. See how that looks like sort of stippled rust breaking out of scratched or damaged paintwork. So let's go over to the model. Okay, I'm quite happy with that, but I will just show you what you can do if you've put too much on. So let's say you've overdone it, you want to tone this down. So all I do is take a cotton bud, soak it in a tiny little piece of IPA, and we'll just dab it onto the paintwork, and we can use this to remove some of the rust that we've applied and thin things down. Try and work in a up and down motion. Anything that streaks will streak down the side of the wagon and add to the weathering effects. The IPA reacts with the uncured paint, and it's very easy to remove any effects that you think you might have overdone slightly. And you can keep doing this for as long as you want. And you can combine doing that and then coming back over with the sponge and adding further bits of rust and build things up until you're happy. with the overall effect. Okay, so now I'm going to continue the weathering effects. As you can see, the inside of the wagon certainly needs quite a bit of weathering. I'm going to be modelling this as an empty rake, as if it's come back from some engineering work and it's heading back to either get more ballast or park up for a few days. So the insides of the wagons need to be quite heavily weathered, as you're going to be able to see all the way to the bottom, because I'm modelling an empty rake. I also need to do a little bit of subtle weathering to the white handrails and wheels fitted to the ends of the wagons. As you can see, they're a bit bright, a bit garish. So we'll be using the wash that I used previously to tone the wagons down, and then some white and some black weathering powder. I'll combine these into a grey, and also add some white highlights to give the effect of you know, that sort of white pastel-y sort of dust that you get from stones when you've got a lot of them in the same place. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. Nice and dirty on the inside, you can see how the weathering powders allow you to create lighter and darker spots and really vary the tones. Quite pleased with that. Also done the handrails and the various bits of white detail around the wagon, and then the chutes at the bottom, I've just gone over that in the wet wash, and that's drying at the moment, and then what we'll do is we'll go over that again when it's dry to make it look much more like the inside of the wagon here. Just gone over it with a wet wash to provide something for the weathering powders to stick to. If you just try and brush the weathering powders straight onto the plastic, sometimes they don't adhere properly at all, so it's a good idea to perhaps go over it with a wet application first.
Okay, so there we are. Completed most of the weathering effects. It's now time to do some airbrushing. Up to now everything has been done with paint brushes and other materials. But they certainly need some sleeper grime airbrushing along the base to weather the bogies. Just add a few bits of grime, and then I also need to varnish them to seal in all of these weathering powders. If I go to pick any of these up, then grease from my hands will get onto the models and make a mark, and also the powders will come off on my fingers over time. So it's generally a good idea to do some varnishing to seal all of this in, make the models much easier to handle. Okay, so here we are at the trusty spray booth, ready to go, and first thing I'm going to do is apply some sleeper grime along the base of the wagon, specifically focusing on the bogies. I find it most comfortable to hold the wagon in my hand when I do something like this, so again, wearing gloves, very important. Okay, turn on the spray booth. It will be a bit noisy from now on. Okay, there we go. Nice and subtle, not too crazy. Haven't plastered the model. So I'll leave that one to dry, and now we'll do the other four. Now it's time to do some matte varnishing. This is mostly to seal in the weathering powder, but it also makes the model easier to handle. It's less susceptible to having damage done to the paint finish by being handled if you've done it with some matte varnish. My favourite matte varnish to use is Rail Match again. It's number 407 for the matte varnish. So there we have it, the models are now weathered, they're complete. You could go further, you could add other effects and bits and pieces, but for the moment I'm quite happy with that. So they're back behind my pair of Class 33s, ready for service on the layout. I'll be looking to add a few more wagons, I think, to this rake. We could have some spoil wagons, wagons which were filled with waste from the work site. As I've modelled an empty train, it would be appropriate to have some wagons marshalled into the rake that are filled with spoil and waste and rubbish and material that has been dragged back from site after the team has finished doing the engineering. You'll notice there is a slight difference in the liveries. The 4 wagons that I weathered previously are in a slightly later revision of the engineer's Dutch livery. I believe this version of the livery dates from the 1990s. I've weathered them and changed the decals for the warnings of overhead cables back to the older style of 1980s ones, just to make them blend in a little bit better. I'm going to leave them at that for now. They are probably technically a little too new for the era I'm modelling. I should backdate them. You'll notice the sole bar is black on those wagons, but to be honest, once they're running on the layout, it's not all that noticeable. So I'll stick with it for now. Overall, good fun, and I'm pleased with the results.
So there we go, that completes this particular weathering job. Hope you enjoyed the video, and perhaps you even picked up the odd hint or tip. So as I say, busy on the layout. The next video, I'm working on 2 at the moment. It'll either be more progress on the layout itself, although I have been hampered slightly by recent weather, or it'll be a repaint of a locomotive that I'm currently working on. So whichever one comes out will be determined by which project I finish first. So I'll leave you with some bonus footage now that I shot a couple of weeks ago. Andy from the Warley Model Railway Club and Dave from Dean Park Station visited the layout, and we had a good day playing trains, talking trains, lots of questions, lots of filming, and these are just a couple of bits that I managed to capture on the day. I will leave links in the video description for the relevant videos that relate to this if you are interested in seeing more behind the scenes at Everard Junction. So for now, I'll leave you with that, and as I say, I'll be back soon with the next video, which should be a repaint or further progress on the layout.
Okay, well, thank you, Dave and Andy, for coming and visiting the layout. You both seem to have enjoyed yourselves.
Oh, it's been brilliant.
So, yeah, we had a good running session of a couple of locos and stuff, and you've asked me to ask you a couple of questions. So, if we start with you, Dave, Dean Park has been under construction for a long time now. What's the biggest lesson that you've learned, or what's the most important piece of advice you would give to somebody starting in the hobby?
Two bits of advice. Plan what you, whether it's in your imagination or doodle it down, have a list of things that you want to achieve or add into the layout, and make sure it's manageable, because we talked earlier about you can only fit so much in a space.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to make sure you know what you're wanting to put in within your limitations of ability as well as space. Second thing I would definitely recommend, and this is quite, you know, poignant for what we've discussed earlier between ourselves, is baseboards. Getting the baseboard, you know, stable and true, and make it of a material that can withstand, especially when making up a loft or in a hut or a garage where there's fluctuations. Make sure it is made of, you know, stable materials, because it's got to cope with fluctuations in temperature.
Absolutely, yeah. And Everard Junction Mark 1 came a cropper because of poor baseboard construction. So, much needed piece of advice.
Yeah.
So we'll jump over to Andy now. So Andy, you've started modelling in O scale. How does modelling in O scale compare to double O? Are there any major differences or things you need to take into account?
It's scary at first, because when you get used to doing track and radius of curves in double O, it looks quite natural.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're trying to adjust and double the size of the curves, but it doesn't always look as natural as double O. But it's also the amount of detail you can put. You can paint something double O and you can get away with things. But
Yeah.
in O gauge and the sheer size, it hits like a barn, like, you know.
Yeah, I suppose you have to do everything because it's all visible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's
And space obviously is a big factor.
Yeah, I'm lucky with Warley Club. I've got space. I can build my layers, but I wouldn't like to try it in a loft.
Yeah. Okay, back to you, Dave. Which area of Dean Park did you gain the most satisfaction from, or what is your favourite part of the layout as it stands now?
Now, I got a lot of satisfaction from building the station roof.
Yes.
That is 1.5 metres in length, and it's on the Scale Scenes downloadable kits.
Yes, I remember.
Everything on that side of the station was based around the span of that roof. The position of the buildings at the front, the position of the upper main lines at the back, how much space I had to play with. All was done because obviously the span is set by Scale Scenes. It's very difficult to start altering the span. So that was my kind of most impressive part to date. But moving round, as my skill levels develop, I'm currently working on a scratch build for the TMD office, and you know, it's grown arms and legs, but I'm getting there, and it's hopefully it'll be the kind of centerpiece for the depot side of the layout. So far the roof, I love it to bits, as well as my Waverley signal box, which was my first scratch build.
Oh yes, I remember the signal box,
which took quite a while to kind of grapple with. But as I move around, hopefully something will, you know, will take over from that roof as my proudest achievement so far.
Okay, great. Okay, back to you, Andy. So obviously you're heavily involved with the Warley Model Railway Club. Did you get into railway modelling via the club scene?
No, I started off as a 4-year-old with a 5 foot by 4 foot board.
So it was
my dad's.
So it was in the blood.
So my dad bought a train set for me.
That wasn't yesterday, was it?
Which was
5 years
a
old.
couple of weeks ago. A couple of weeks ago. Same mental age, to be fair. But yeah, I had a stall which I could sit on and watch the trains go round and not touch. And I've still got those. You know, I was talking to Simon. It was a Hornby Class 25 and a GWR 040 freight set. So I started at that, and then you get to an age where you're playing football, and I'd actually joined Warley Club probably about 10 years before I did this time, and I sort of went a couple of times, and then I thought, no, I'd give it a miss. And then I got back into watching your videos, Glebe Road, Dean Parker. I think we started our YouTube channel about the same sort of time. And you sort of get the, I think I bought a Hornby Flying Scotsman set, and it's like set tracking me spare bedroom, and then you go into the loft, and it just grew from there.
It is it's a disease, isn't it? It's very much a blood-borne disease that I can't remember a time when I wasn't.
There's no vaccination.
No, there isn't, is there? No. There's nothing you can do other than just try and manage it. Okay, Dave, and the last silly question for you, and you know the answer to this.
Oh no.
How many Class 47s does Dave Class 47 have?
I've got 25 at the moment. And I say at the moment.
At the moment.
Because they trundle them out by the dozen, and I just can't help myself. I've got ones from all regions of British Rail, from the stunning Network South East one, up to a Highland Rail one with the stag on it. Well, I keep collecting them. As what you said, it was a disease. I've got disease.
You've got like
plus.
It's a more specific strain of the disease.
It's even harder to find a vaccine for.
You can't even say, well, I just want to collect all the liveries, because there's so many liveries for a 47.
I've not got as many as other people who don't specialise in Class 47s. So I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
But give it time and I'll catch them up.
Okay, Andy, and last question for you. If you could start railway modelling again and you had an unlimited budget and time, what sort of a layout would you build?
I would have I'd go with 7mm. If I had
so full O-gauge convert.
Full gauge, because the amount of detail and the amount of stuff that's coming out now in ready to run. It's Halogen, Dapper. The stuff is out there now, and Hattons with the A3s, A4s, and I know when you went to Hattons, when you had I think was it the A3 or the A4?
It was the A3,
and you filmed it. You didn't need sound. It just sounded.
The noise is unreal.
It sounded brilliant, and I just you can really get your hands on them, and they feel chunky and. It's just but you need the space.
The space is the biggest problem, isn't it? I always say to people, O-gauge is dangerous, because once you've touched it, you can't let go.
I started with a Pink Waterman, just like the real thing, Class 25, and the guys at the club said, "Andy, don't do it." I said, "No, I want to have a go at building one." And that one's turned into just like the real thing, Class 37. That's in about. It's sort of built. I've got a 50 in a box somewhere.
You should see his house.
I've got 40.
I've got 3 decades of work to catch
47, up and it's like the like these guys who build Airfix kits. They've got more kits than life expectancy.
It's crazy.
I feel like that sometimes, and I'm only 47.
Well, there you go. So we have two gentlemen. One suffers from Class 47 disease, and the other suffers from O-gauge disease.
Pity us.
Well, thank you for your time.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for coming over, and let's run some trains.
Excellent. Let's go.
Cool.
I'm nervous about seeing you disappear down that hatch. That's me on a roll now. It's like the first hole in golf. I've screwed it up. My round's in tatters. The only way is up.
Okay, well, this is a test to see if the microphone is any good, so...
I'm going to reply to that and ask you, is your microphone any good?
And I'm now going to go and check.
Is it ready? We're ready to go. Right. First question I've...
You're going to make me laugh now.